Michelle and Letha.
Yeah. So we're finishing up chapter 12. I believe we read through 20, verse 20 last week. So we're picking up with 21. And it was, he was telling the people to get ready for the Passover, getting ready for the angel of death to come over, and they would sprinkle the blood or paint the lintel and the side posts with the blood so the angel of death would pass over them. And they should be ready, their sandals on, their belts on, their staffs in their hand. Don't have any leaven in your food because you're not going to have time to cook it as you go out the door. But they were going to have their Passover meal that night, and they did. And we went through all that. So we start out at verse 21. It says, Then Moses called for the elders, all the elders of Israel, and said unto them, Draw out, and he kind of goes through it again, Take a lamb according to your families, kill the Passover, and ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and you will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. So God had told them, told Moses what was going to happen, and now he's just reciprocating this, telling them this is going to happen, get ready for it. Telling the elders, and then the elders passed it out to the people, and they went out. And we talked a little bit about it. Moses, they called for take a bunch of hyssop. Hyssop is a plant. If you kind of look at it, I always thought it was kind of the bunchy stuff with the end, kind of like a big cattail or something with a bunch. But what they showed on the internet, it's kind of long, skinny, and has, it kind of looks like lavender to me or something like that. It goes out and has a bunch of petals on the end of it. And I'm not really sure why, but that's what it was. It's not really an herb that I know of. It's just a plant that grows, and they use it for different purposes. Here, they used it as a paintbrush. It also says that hyssop was used to make the ashes of a red heifer for the water purification. What they would do, they would take the hyssop. It's supposed to be a purifying plant. What they do, after they found the perfect red heifer with no white hairs, no imperfections in it, they would sacrifice it, burn it, take the ashes of it, and put hyssop in it with it, burn it with that, and put it in the bath that the priests would take their bath in before they entered the Holy of Holies, when they would do this. So they did this, and it would get ready for them. It was supposed to be purifying all existence, everything out of it. So that's, I think, one reason why they used it here too. It's kind of a purification, showing that this hyssop was also used in Christ's crucifixion, where they dipped it. Said they dipped hyssop in red wine, or in wine, old wine, I think it was, and gave him vinegar. Basically, is what it is. Gave it to him to suck on, because your mouth gets so dry when they were crucifying him. And he, rejected it once, and then I think he finally took it. It is a numbing agent too, because it's wine. But even as, I think I may have told you guys one time we went up to Canada, and we was driving around. I had a school up there, and we went out, and there was this nice little island out in a river. I think it's the St. Lawrence River there. But it was a pretty big island. We drove around it. It was maybe 10 miles to go around it. And we kept seeing these cider farms on this island. And I said, stop and taste some cider? And they said, yeah, that'd be fine, because every one of them was touting their winter cider. It was grand. And I like cider, so we stopped in there, got it, and they was telling us how they make it. And I'm like, I don't know about this. They picked up the apples that was on the ground. They were already fermented, most of them. So me and Darla, they gave us a little bitty vial, about like you take communion with them, and we both took it, and we're like, ooh, this is hard liquor. This is hard cider. And it's not hard cider, it's hard vinegar. It's like, man, where do I spit this out? Because it was nasty.
I'll be looking for a mint real
Well, oh, thank you very much. We're like, it's like, and people like this?
They're used to it over there.
I guess. But, yeah, they was proud of that. I don't know why, but it was. It says hyssop was even connected with Jesus' great sacrifice for sin. It tells us in John 19, it points out when Jesus was offered the sour wine, so that's vinegar, to drink on the cross. The sponge soaked it up and it was put on a bunch of hyssop. So they put a sponge up on the hyssop, I guess is a pretty sturdy plant. And then, of course, it says when he sees the blood on the lintel that the Lord would pass over, it's the Lord's angel. The Lord looked for the blood. The blood sacrifice was the basis for sparing people from judgment. Rescue from the angel of death didn't happen by prayer or fasting or a good work. It was accomplished by a life given on behalf of others. This is, and it's much like Christ's dedication, his giving his life for us on the cross. It's very similar. If you look, it's kind of vague, but if you hit it at the top, hit the lintel, painted it, and painted both sides, if you stood back, it would kind of look like a cross, because it'd be, two sides of it. It's what they were saying. 24 through 27 says, and ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee, and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. What he's talking about, the Passover tonight. And it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye this by this service, that ye shall say, it is a sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. So it's telling them that you need to pass this on. This Passover was from then on for the Jewish people. They still have the Passover today. It's recognized. It's one of their main festivals that they have. An ordinance, of course, is something to remember. We pass ordinances, we call them laws. Okay, city laws, city ordinances, state ordinances. God is establishing this. Moses is telling them to establish this forever. And remember, it's actually, and I've never been to one, it'd be kind of neat to go, I've kind of wondered about it, to go to a Passover to see what happens. What I've heard happens is they ask questions. The children have it's a routine. I think it's the children ask questions like this. Why do we do this? And then the elders will say, okay, this is because we were in Egypt, we're in bondage 400 plus years, 430 years, and this is when the Lord delivered us out of Egypt, and this is what happened, this was caused. So it's a going back and forth of reciting this, and that helps them to remember an oral subject or an oral story that they had. It says, in the same way, Jesus gave the new Passover, saying that his work on the cross was not only for that generation, but should be remembered and applied to all generations. So here again, being a type and shadow, Christ will allow us to have a Passover when the end times come, as far as it's not something we have to do all the time. We have to do it once. We accept him once, but then we have to live in that Passover. We have to live in him. Then it tells the story of when he struck the Egyptians and delivered the household. It says there's twofold work. First, an enemy was defeated, the Egyptians. And second, God's people were set free and given a new identity with new promises, a new walk, and a new life altogether. And here in just a few minutes, I think it'll tell us that before he had told the people to go out and start borrowing for all the people around them, all the Egyptians around them. This is for their new life. They get to go out, and they're not going out, with nothing, with just clothes on their back. They're going out with everything that was given to them. It says, and the people bowed the head and worshipped, and the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So did they. So they heard this, they heard it from the elders, they heard it from Moses and Aaron, and they went back to their houses and started doing it. Because this took a little while, like we said, to get the Passover. Last week we talked about it. They had to choose a lamb or a goat, and it had to live with them 4 days before they sacrificed it. It had to mean something to them. Not that it was, just go out there and get any goat, and, like you're going to have dinner, or get a chicken and have dinner. This had to mean something to them, and it did to the family. It became part of the family, much like Christ become part of our family and become part of the Jewish family when he was here. His, brothers, the 12 disciples that he had, and they were a family, and yet he had to give his life for them. It says the immediate reaction to Israel to this announcement was worship. They honored the God who said he would do all this for them, and in many ways these were the most important words of the whole account. The children of Israel went away and did so. As great as God's deliverance was, the people would have never received it if they had failed to do what God had told them to do. Let's see, it says, well, a little bit later on, I think it tells us that it doesn't matter if they had the Passover and didn't paint the lintels. They had to put the blood on the doorpost to prevent them. He had to do exactly everything that he told them. It wasn't just one piece or the other.
The question though, I'm sure they did it all, but what if they had not done some of it, only done part of it?
That's what I said. You have to do all of it. You had to do all that God told them to do. Otherwise, you would not. I mean, there was many, I'm sure, that didn't do it. It's kind of like us today. Okay, you can say you accept Christ, but if you don't ever do it and act like you're a Christian, I mean, it's not acting, but if the evidence is not in your life, you're not a Christian. I mean, there's a lot of people in Washington, I think, that call themselves Christian, and there's no way. Because, they're not living Christ-like. That's what being a Christian means, to follow Christ.
Do we have any idea? They had to have the lamb for 4 days.
Right.
And I'm missing it if it gives us an indication of whether it took 3 days to get the word out to everybody.
It didn't say. It didn't tell us all what. This time frame, though, and it will tell us this in a little bit, it's 10 days is the time from the Passover that they have to eat. They keep the lamb for 4 days, and then they leave. And then for 7 days after they leave, they can only eat unleavened bread. They can't eat anything else. So it'll come up in just a little bit, I think. If it's not this week, it's next week. But it tells them, okay, that's why we had to eat as much as you can, eat all of it you can, and burn the rest of the lamb. Eat the herbs, eat the bitter herbs, and eat this and the unleavened bread, and have that. But then after they leave, all they can have after that for 7 days is the unleavened bread. So we do have it's about 10 days here, but you got to realize in the middle of that is the Passover, that middle night when it happens, the third night or the fourth day.
The number that came out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So huge, and they didn't have phones and everything
right.
like that to
right.
contact them. I was wondering, it doesn't say it, but you wonder, all right, what if somebody didn't know till 3 days before it happened? They didn't have the 4 days for the lamb.
Well,
so how did
I think that kind of incorporates when it told them to get together, and we talked about a family unit, and that if you did so small, then go gather together with your neighbors to have that. And we talked about
And
it's
you
not
pass
in
it.
there,
It's
but
word of mouth that passes
maybe
it on.
10 to 20 people should partake in that, you know, should do they want it as a family, is what they kind of want it, but God told them, you know, if it's a small family and you're gonna have too much food, a lamb is pretty, you know, it's
Right.
a good deal of meat. So if your neighbor doesn't have any, invite them over. If they're a small family, you know, bring them together. So we don't know exactly what it was, how big it was, but I think in just a minute it'll answer a little bit of the questions. They didn't, but they sent it out. So evidently it had to have some time to get out to them.
Well, if you look at verse 3 of chapter 12, or those first 3 verses, it says, the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron. And then verse 3 says, he told them, said, speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel.
Right.
So,
In the 10th day of this month. So
Yeah, so
there's at least
evidently-
10 days.
evidently there was an assembly of
Right.
some that
Right.
they spoke it to, and then probably, you know, like Bertha was saying, then they was to go out and tell.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You
word
know,
of mouth,
the
cause how
others.
else do they do that?
But you
Exactly.
Well, they had runners. They would
Huh?
run. They would send runners out.
Well,
You
yeah.
That would-
also gotta
would tell-
believe that some had to get the word out to some of the Egyptians.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Egyptians that believed and tried to follow
Yeah.
after, the word would have had to went to them too.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it as like a community, to where it's like a housing edition, sort of. You've got neighbors here, neighbors here, neighbors here,
Mhm.
and all they had to do is go next door, knock on, and pass
Yeah.
it on.
Yeah.
But they went on, I'm sure, went to other areas. They sent each representative, because it had the elders, and I'm sure they had elders kind of spread
And
out through the
also, they
different
already
areas.
knew that time of year
Mhm.
was for that.
Well, it tells them, if we go back to the previous, it says, this is gonna be new year for you. Okay,
Yeah.
it's gonna start out, and this is when it's gonna start out, and that's what said, in the first month of the year to you. Okay, so it was ahead a certain amount of time. We don't know what particular time it was right
I
then.
like what you said about runners. I
Yeah.
can see them sending
Yeah.
out
Oh, yeah.
runners too.
Yeah, it's just like send them either running or send them horseback or whatever. They had messengers.
Which was
Because
that
they
was-
did that all the time.
That story about the one on that horseback that went through the town yelling,
Oh, yeah.
you know? Yeah. So it's kind of basic same thing.
So they went ahead and they did as they said, like we said, they went on and went away. And then it starts in verse 29, the plague. It says, and it came to pass that at midnight, okay, now you gotta remember, the start of their day is sundown. So it's only 6 hours into their day, but midnight's still midnight. It's the middle of the night. The Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. That's basically livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. So every house, you know, had some kind of firstborn in it. May not have been people per se, but they did have people, and it could be animals, could be anything that they
And my wonder is, and I wondered about this, is that how far apart do the Israel people live from the Egyptians?
I'm sure there was a little bit of
You know.
disconnect, but not much, I would
It's
say.
a lot of land.
No, well, it is, if you go back and look, and I don't have it, but if you look on a map of the Nile River and where it's green, usually they show it as green, it's where, that's in the middle of it's kind of where Pharaoh had his city, Ramses had his area, his territory. Because it wasn't walled or anything that I'm aware of that, you know, you could get in and out like some of the countries were. But it was mainly, they were concentrated in that area. And we see here a little later on, when the people leave, it says that they left Ramses. So Ramses was his influence, where Pharaoh was most noted, his city. Okay? So once they got out of there, they passed that border, they're no longer, even though they're still in, quote, Egypt, they're no longer in Pharaoh's domain, they're outside of
What made me
his.
think about it was the fact that Egypt you know, God put all these plagues on Pharaoh and Egypt, but, you know, he had to know, not so far down the road.
Oh, yeah.
That Israelites were not touched,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And he
Yeah.
didn't have far to go to.
Now, some of them were, on each one of the plagues, you remember, some of them did touch the Israelites and some didn't.
Yeah,
But
but most of them, yeah.
the last ones, it was pretty much all Egyptians. Said, now the situation unfolded just as God said it would. Pharaoh would not let him go, and he basically God told them, this is what's going to happen if you don't. Says, literally, said to the firstborn of captive who was in the dungeon. Says literally the pit house. Okay, says here, you know, from the lowest place you could be to the Pharaoh's house, they were touched. All the firstborn in the land of Egypt. This was directed against two Egyptian gods. First, Osiris was the Egyptian god thought to be the giver of life. Second, there was supposed the deity of Pharaoh himself, because Pharaoh was supposed to be a god, and God's proving him who he was. He asked in the very beginning, who is God? Well, God's showing him that this, you know, you think you're a god, you're no God. I'm God. It's kind of interesting here. It kind of goes back to what we talked about a little bit last week. It says an inscription was found in a shrine connected with the great Sphinx that records a solemn promise from the Egyptian gods vowing that Thutmose IV would succeed his father Amenhotep II, whom many believed to be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This is unique, emphatic promise from the gods that something so natural would happen that the eldest son would take his father's place as Pharaoh was perhaps because Thutmose IV was not his father's firstborn. Okay? The firstborn was struck dead at the first Passover. Therefore, they believed that the second-born son needed special protection from the gods, and the inscription sought to provide that. So it's interesting. It kind of lends a little credence to that thought that he wasn't the firstborn, the leader, Pharaoh at that particular time. So Pharaoh rose up in the night. He knew what God told him was going to happen, and it happened. And that's when he told him to get out.
What I don't understand is, did Pharaoh never believe God?
No.
Ever?
No. I mean, he did as long as he saw what was happening, but then he turned right around. You don't understand the mentality. He's God.
Oh yeah.
And he had, you don't backtalk me, you don't do anything. I'm God, I can kill you if I want to. And nobody's going to have repercussions.
No,
it's same thing. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. Same thing. Some of our leadership today, the North Korean guy, you know, he thinks he's God.
No humility at all.
And there's several others that they think they're untouchable, is what they think. And that's what Pharaoh thought. So 31 through 36 says, and he, talking about Pharaoh, called for Moses and Aaron by night. This is at midnight, after midnight sometime. Rise up and go forth from my people, both ye and the children of Israel. Go, serve the Lord as you've said. Take your flocks, your herds, as you've said, and be gone. Bless me also. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, he's starting to believe. Not that he's God, but that it's better, he's bigger than me. Okay? And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we be all dead men. I mean, if God could kill the firstborn, there's nothing else standing in his way. He'd kill all of them if he didn't let him go, and that was their thought. So the people took their dough, the unleavened bread, before it was leavened, like I said, their kneading troughs, their bowls and things that they made it in, being bound up in their cloths upon their shoulders. They had already packed everything up. Okay? And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. They borrowed from the Egyptian jewels of silver, jewels of gold, raiment. The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of Egyptians, so that they lent unto them many such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. So in that, they actually got their payback for 400 plus years of slavery.
And they didn't have to beg.
No, they were giving it to them. They were wanting them to leave. They were afraid that God's going to wipe everybody out if they don't let their people go.
I could just see the Egyptians coming out to the door. Here, take it off.
Well, yeah, give them their clothes, give them their finest, whatever they had. And the bless me also says, this shows now Pharaoh knew who God was, or who the Lord the God was greater than Pharaoh, and whom Pharaoh must seek for blessing. Pharaoh only came to this knowledge through being broken. He had to be brought down to a level that he could accept that, okay, somebody's bigger than me.
Well, we have some of those in the world today.
We do. We have a lot of people like that today. I mean, not a lot, but it's a very easy, and you get a leadership position, I think it seems to go to their head.
Their ego got real big.
Well, they think they have a lot of say in what's going on, and they feel like that's what that's power, when it's not really. I mean, yeah, you can affect.
Dictatorship.
Well, it can be that very easily if they don't, if they let it get away from them, which ours is quickly becoming, I think. So they plundered the Egyptians. They left in a hurry, so time they didn't even have enough time to let the bread rise. They'd set it out. They'd already been commanded, don't put the leaven in it. So this is why they had to eat the unleavened bread. We can imagine some of the Israelites did not follow God's instructions to get all the leaven out. Now, because of the haste of their departure, they had to do what God had told them, because God arranged the circumstances so they couldn't use leaven. You know, it's like, well, I'll do one last batch and then it'll be fine. And then they have to leave bread there because it ain't risen. They don't have any way to keep it. It says, sometimes God arranges circumstances to where obedience is simply made necessary, even if we would not normally choose it. For God may want a man to give up friends that are a bad influence, and the man finds that his friends leave him first. So God can make it to where it'll happen if you don't do it yourself. So now here's where we find out a few things. Verse 37 says, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses, what I was talking about earlier, to Succoth. About 600,000 on foot were men, besides the children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks, and herds, and even very much cattle. The mixed multitude, in my opinion, I think, and it stands to reason, is the Egyptians, the ones that did believe. They went ahead and participated in the sacrifice, in the Passover, and in the blood on the doorposts. Now it says there, they went from Succoth. Now, if you look at a map, and I didn't bring one, but if you look at a map, it's on the west side. You know, the Red Sea comes up like this, and it's got two little forks. One goes one way, one goes the other. They show that Succoth is on the other side of this first, or the westernmost fork. And right there, close to that, there's some mountains there. There's a plains that they can get to it. Not relatively easy, but it's they said a moderate, but it's kind of a big open area. Succoth means to be protected, to be sheltered. There's also copper and turquoise mines there. And they said that they knew a lot of the a lot of the Israelites were working as slaves in that area. So they wanted to go by, Moses wanted to go by and pick them up. So here's what I'm talking about. Now it was I don't know how far a journey, but it was in the night when they did it. So it could be that those people worked over there and stayed for a period of time, then went back to their house or not. but the men and the women the women that was there, that their husbands or brothers or sisters or, men was there, they wanted them to go with them, of course, and they participated in it. So whoever lived over there, we don't know exactly, they stayed there for a particular time to go and meet up with these people. So that's why they went there, to bring them. And they stayed there a little while, because it said they baked their unleavened cakes of the dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victuals, any goods, any food. They just had that unleavened bread.
What's the
Victuals?
Victuals.
Victuals? That's what Jethro says.
Haven't heard that in a while.
Victuals?
John, or seen it either.
It's victuals, yeah. They didn't have any food other than the bread.
Yeah.
Here it says succoth means shelters. It may not describe a temporary encampment instead of an existing Egyptian city. And it goes on and says it's easy to imagine the celebrations at Succoth that night from the people. And it talks about the 600,000 men and women, the men only. It said that could be a total population of people of maybe up to 2 million people. 2 million Israelites. Yeah. Just think of the stadiums that we see today that have 100,000 seats in them. 10 times more is 1 million. So it'd be 10 stadiums, 20 stadiums worth of people. Now you go to any one of them stadiums and try to get anywhere very fast. It ain't very fast because it's hard to get.
Rich Steve's Travels.
Uh-huh.
He'll tell some of the history of these places. It's really cool.
It also talks about that some of them tried to explain it, that instead of thousands, the word, Hebrew word elep for 1,000 could also be translated clans or tribes.
They used to call them clans and tribes.
Yeah, but they think that's not really, that's trying to diminish a little bit the number of people that it was. They think it would rather be the thousands that were said. And it says many Egyptians and probably other foreigners that were there, went with them because of God of Israel demonstrated that he was more powerful than all the gods of Egypt. Now in this time also, I read some of the history that they said possibly happened. As the angel went through, he also destroyed all their shrines, all the gods, all the, everything, implicating that there is no other God besides God. All your gods are false gods. So all their altars, all their, temples, totems, idols, whatever they had, they were getting destroyed. Now that's here again, more hearsay. It's not in the Bible, but that makes sense to me. Mixed multitude, said the Hebrew word says swarm. So if you want to think of that, and that would be like what it would be, a mass of people coming out. Here again talks about the unleavened bread. Because they were driven out, they didn't have time to cook the bread, they had to wait. And they cooked it later, they couldn't let it rise. Verse 40 says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So they were there 430 years to the day that they came into it. It's a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. So it's setting it up. That's why, for one reason, they set it up as a new year. This is going to be a new beginning for you. It says apparently the exodus from Egypt began the same calendar day as it started 430 years earlier. The phrase out of Egypt is repeated 56 times in the Bible after this point. God wanted his people to remember this deliverance from Egypt. So anytime we see something repeated over and over again, we know it's important. It's for our remembrance too. Now it goes on and talks about the Passover a little bit. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance or the law of the Passover. There shall be no stranger eat thereof, but every man's servant is bought for money. When thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and a hired servant shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house. Neither shall you break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as one that is born in the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. Basically telling them, okay, these people that came with you have to obey the rules just like you guys did. So there were some that went and participated that night. They didn't have enough time to do the circumcision, but now you need to do the circumcision, because that was given by Abraham. It's Abrahamic covenant, one of the covenants that was given for God's people. So a foreigner, one that does not believe, can't participate in this Passover services. It's basically what's telling us. Another type and shadow, it says, now you shall break not one of its bones. That references back to Christ, where not one of his bones was broken. Most of the time they would break the criminals or the crucified bones to help where they couldn't lift themselves up, because basically they suffocated to death. Whenever they would crucify them, they were hanging this way, and when your arms are up, if you're like holding on to something, I don't know if you've ever done it, but if like on a playground or something like that, you just hold it on to, it pulls your arms up, and you can't take very deep breaths. It's just your diaphragm's up in you, and you can't. So they would push themselves up. Even though they had a nail in their feet, the only way they could get any relief was to push themselves up on that nail. Incredibly excruciating pain, but then they could breathe, and then it would hurt, so they would drop back down again, and they'd let them breathe. And they could do that for hours.
Very, very slow death.
Oh yeah, very painful. And that's why, to speed it up, they would go and break their legs so they couldn't. So eventually they'd just suffocate. Well, they didn't even have to do that with Christ, because he was already dead. They put the spear in him just to make sure. Verse 50 and 51. Thus did all the children of Israel as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies. Here it starts calling them armies, and maybe once before. But they are. I mean, you got 2 million people there, 600,000 men. That's an army. A lot of them were slaves that were used to hard work. They could fight among the best of them. And I'm sure Egypt, that was one of the reasons they kept them under their thumb, because they knew that if anybody joined up with them, they'd get defeated in a heartbeat. So they were there 430 years, and it says the plagues were like labor pains before the birth, and now the nation was born by the releasing from Egypt.
Very, very interesting.
Any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, thank God I wasn't there to be crucified. You know, they also line them up, somewhere they line up and shoot them, and I would rather have been shot.
Well, yeah, it's a lot quicker death.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that, and the reason they